Steve in Virginia, you have a question for myself and Jenna, and I think I can answer your question with 2 words. So go ahead. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Matt. Sorry to hear about your friend, and Jenna, sorry to hear that as well. I hope day gets better throughout the week.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Yeah, no problem. The reason I'm asking this question is lack of belief. Because I hear this commonly from particularly internet atheists, not you per se, though there are some occasions. But aside from that, my problems with that usage of the word to define atheism. But before going further, I'll say straight off the bat, how you define atheism is polysemous. I'm not going to deny that. But
what? I'm sorry. What was that?
Baggage.
There's a number of different ways to define it.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah. The issue is, if you're going with that, it's going to come with baggage.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't come with any baggage that I can't solve by answering 2 words. What was the question that you told the screener you wanted to ask? Just ask that and I'll answer it.
Okay. If someone's an atheist for the lack of belief in a god or gods, do rocks and other...
Oh my God, that's not what you said you wanted to... So literally what I have here from the call screener is what is lack of belief? And that's easily answerable by 2 words, not convinced. If you want to have a conversation about whether or not rocks are atheist, that's an incredibly stupid conversation, not your fault. Plenty of atheists engaged in this stupid conversation for the last week, and I stayed out of it. So let's handle it really quickly right now. For any belief position, there's an implicit view and an explicit view. And so a rock is an atheist in the sense that it is implicitly lacking in belief or implicitly does not have belief or is implicitly not convinced. But this is distinct from someone who's an atheist like myself, who is explicitly not convinced, which means that I am an agent who could be convinced and am not convinced. That's what makes me different from a rock. And so for every atheist out there who's trying to run around and say, well, you know, technically rocks are atheists, you're correct. And what you've said is just as fucking useless as anything I've ever heard from a theist. Why are we wasting time with it? Nobody gives a shit about rocks or trees or toenail clippings or anything else. What we're talking about here are people who could be convinced and either are convinced, in which case they're a theist, or are not convinced, in which case they're an atheist. We're talking about explicit atheism. Any conversation about implicit atheism is a monumental waste of my fucking time.
Does that make sense, Steve?
Okay. Yeah, so basically it does require a mental assent from a conscious being.
For explicit atheism, the only thing that I care to discuss, yes, it requires a conscious agent who remains unconvinced.
Okay. Yeah, so say I mirror the exact same argument with theism and define it as a lack of belief in the non-existence of the deity.
That's patently absurd. That's a semantic, useless game, because what we do in logic is we evaluate propositions. There is a proposition, some God exists. That is the proposition that we're evaluating. And if you accept it, you're a theist. And if you don't accept it, you're a non-theist or an atheist in the weak sense. To say that the default proposition is no gods exist and theists are just rejecting that is not only dishonest, it is absurd, because it fails to understand where the default position should be on an existential claim and what the null hypothesis should be. So you can't say theism is a lack of belief in the assertion that there is no God. That's a load of crap.
Well, then would you then say atheism is the belief that there are no gods?
No, atheism is not a belief that there are no gods. That's what I told you. Atheism is not being convinced that there is a God.
Some people, I think, would say that is the definition, but in this case, the way that Matt and I use it, we don't use it that way.
I happen to be convinced, in fact, that there are no gods, but my atheism is just a lack of being convinced that there are.
So you believe the proposition P as in theism is false?
No, some people will.
I personally do. I personally do. But that's not what atheism is.
Well, if you believe the proposition theism is false, then that does entail you believe in its negation is true.
I'm describing what I think which is separate from atheism. I happen to be an anti-theist. I happen to be a strong atheist, a hard atheist, someone who is in fact convinced that there are no gods. But that goes beyond the simplistic definition of atheism. So when I tell you what I believe, I'm not saying this is what atheism is. I'm saying this is what Matt believes.
Okay, so atheism in a strong sense is to believe the negation proposition that there are no gods, and weak atheism is just
no.
Convinced or
No. You just confused theism and atheism. So try again.
No, I didn't, because you
did. You said atheism is the belief in the proposition that there are no gods, or the rejection of the proposition.
But you said you're a strong atheist, and that goes back to the distinction between weak and strong atheism.
Sure, but the distinction between weak and strong atheism is that weak atheism is the rejection of P, and strong atheism would be the acceptance of not P, where P is some God exists.
Okay, but that's where I kind of see the problem, because agnostics, atheists, atheists, and agnostics, and theological non-cognitivists, they all do not believe P. But
correct. They are all atheists, whether they like using the label or not.
But they don't take but neither do they take a position on negative P.
I don't give a shit. It doesn't matter.
They don't take P.
There's no middle ground between accepting P and not accepting P. There is a middle ground between accepting P and accepting not P. There is a middle ground between that.
Wait, can you explain that?
So if P is proposition, some God exists, there's no middle ground between accepting that position and not accepting that position.
Right.
But there is a middle ground between accepting that position and accepting the opposite, that no gods exist.
Right, kind of like I'm somewhere in between, but leaning more this way, I see.
Because in logic, we address a single proposition. It's a mistake to try to address two propositions at once.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's two propositions. There's P and not P.
Yeah, but not P is something that you can't demonstrate, which is why it's the null hypothesis. It's the same reason that we begin with a presumption of innocence in a courtroom, because innocence may be impossible to demonstrate, and guilt is what we need to demonstrate. So in the question of existence of a being or an entity or a rock or anything else, the presumption is that it does not exist until such time as there is evidence for its existence.
Well, hold on, because atheism and theism are both metaphysical propositions, meaning they can be neither demonstrated true or false empirically or under null.
No. Theism meets that description. Not accepting theistic propositions, soft atheism, is not itself a proposition.
Well, if atheism is defined in terms of theism and it's its negation, then
no, it's not its negation. I've just explained this to you like 3 or 4 fucking times now. Atheism is not the negation of theism. It is the not accepting theism.
Then
anti-theism is what I'm using as the label for actively saying P is false.
So he is an atheist, but he happens to also be an anti-theist.
Yeah, I can see that distinction, because I've heard others describe theists as anti-theists in some sense or form. I don't know if you agree with that, but
doesn't matter. It's really easy.
Do you understand the concept?
If you have a proposition P, some God exists. If you accept it, you're a theist. If you do not accept it, you're an atheist or a non-theist or weak atheist. If you go a step further, whether you want to call that anti-theism, strong atheism, whatever, and you are convinced that P is false, that's something else in addition.
Okay, so you have the proposition, and propositions are something to be believed. So, and there's usually in epistemology, from my understanding, 3 doxastic attitudes: belief, disbelief, or withhold of judgment. So,
okay, so so I hold that there's only 2. Disbelief is not belief in the contrary. Disbelief is not non-belief. You either believe or you do not believe. That is true for every proposition. There is no middle ground. You either are convinced or you are not convinced. There is no middle ground. There can be no middle ground between being convinced and not being convinced.
If you don't know, then you are not convinced.
Okay, so say there's a proposition that Trump is a good Christian and I reject that. Does that entail I believe that claim to be false?
You would have to tell me, what do you mean when you say you reject it? Because it could be that you could mean that you are not convinced that the claim is true, and you could mean that you're convinced that the claim is false. So you would have to tell me which one you intend to be saying.
Okay, to be more precise, I disbelieve that claim because and that entails me believing that claim to be false.
So you're using disbelief in a way that entails you believing it's false. I don't use disbelief in that way, but now I at least understand that what you're saying is you are actively convinced that Trump is not a good Christian. Okay, now we understand. It was really easy. You described how you were using a term, and now that I know how you're using a term, we can talk about it in that way. I'm not using that term in that way. If I say that I do not believe something, that is not me saying I believe that is false. If I'm saying I disbelieve something in the sense of I am not convinced, I am not asserting that it is false. If I believe something is false, I would just say that. I would say, I believe Christianity isn't true. I believe Trump is a shitty Christian. I believe Trump is a shitty president. I believe Trump, well, let's just not keep going on and on and on. But no matter what the position is, if I believe a proposition, I would always want to express that in terms of I accept a proposition is true or likely true.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, if you're using atheism in the sense like that you're just not convinced, sorry, I hit that, then the theists can reply in the same stance that they're not convinced of a God's non-existence.
Yes, okay. And I already explained to you why that's stupid.
Well, if you think that's stupid, that is kind of special pleading.
No, it's not special pleading. What it is something I've explained about 500 times, including in special videos. Saying that being a theist just means you're not convinced of God's non-existence, means you don't understand the nature of evidence, the burden of proof, the null hypothesis, or why we set up certain positions as defaults until something is demonstrated. Because if you were a theist and all it meant for you was that you're not convinced that God doesn't exist, then you would have to be in a position where you would be accepting multiple different God claims at the same time. And that puts you in a position of cognitive dissonance where you would be accepting mutually exclusive things. And that's why skepticism teaches us that what we do is we withhold our belief until such time as it is warranted by evidence.
I need to ask a question.
Yep.
Steve?
Sure.
Are you trying to understand what we think or how we believe, or are you trying to prove us wrong?
I'm trying to understand where you're coming from, and as regards to my earlier question about rocks, but Matt, disregard that. But more specifically, trying to understand where Matt and you, Jen, are coming from.
Do you understand? Do you believe me when I say that I don't believe in a God? I just don't believe you. When you say there's a God out there and he thinks and does this, do you believe me when I say I don't believe you?
I'm compelled to believe you, although I'd dig a little further to, okay, but what is your position?
I just don't have one.
She just told you.
Hold on. I just don't have one. Do you understand that? I just don't believe it. Like it stops there.
Like if Jenna tells you that she does not believe in a God and then says, do you accept that I'm telling you the truth? Why is that a difficult question? You either accept that she's telling the truth or you don't.
Well, because I understand, because it's hard to understand that that's possible. Because I had trouble. I wouldn't have believed somebody if they had said that to me.
Yeah, but when I was at a point where I wouldn't have believed somebody like that, like you see from Sai and others, I would have just asserted that they do know. So,
well, but he seems to be trying to understand.
So yeah, let's redo this Jenna's question and just do it for both of us. But I'll let Jenna ask, which is, you are convinced that a God exists, and we are both telling you we are not convinced that a God exists.
And that's our position stops there.
And it will stop there. Do you believe that we're being honest about our position?
Yeah, I see where you're coming with the not convinced part, but I guess what I'm trying to ask for more specificity, like, do you believe the proposition is
How could you possibly be more specific other than to say, I am not yet convinced of this proposition? And I know I can give more, which is, I'm not convinced of the theistic proposition because no one has presented sufficient evidence to believe in any of those. And it flies in the face of the fact that there are competing claims about theistic propositions. Not only is there not sufficient evidence to believe, but there is evidence strongly against fundamental things that are tied to theism.
Mm-hmm. Like, are you talking about scientific evidence or?
Yes.
What do you mean exactly? Well,
the notion of a soul is the single most obviously dead and false concept in all of theology. Every single thing that anyone could identify or claim is part of a soul is identifiable as a function of a brain, and it is malleable within a living, healthy brain. It can be altered and changed as brains are damaged, and there is zero evidence of anything that about my identity which persists beyond my death.
Mm-hmm.
And any religion that has a notion of a soul as a foundational element of that religion is flying in the face of the scientific evidence. And so they would need to find a way, a defeater for this understanding of identity that is that conflicts with the soul, and present evidence that there is one. And they don't do that.
Can you understand that there's like there's a God, okay, I don't believe you. And then you go even further to say, and I know that the God's a dude, and the God exists for this long, and he believes in this, and he wants me to do this, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, I don't even believe this thing exists in the first place. Is your confusion that you don't understand what I believe is there instead?
No, I'm trying to word it right. When you say you're not convinced, it's just to somebody like me and say others who are delving into either philosophy or epistemology or what have you.
Steve,
do you think that we haven't studied it yet?
Steve, do you think the Loch Ness Monster is real?
No.
So you are not convinced of the Loch Ness Monster. Are you convinced that the Loch Ness Monster is a fiction?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. What reason do you have for that?
Have you done research into that?
The reason I believe there's no such thing as a Loch Ness Monster because there has been no discovery of it. There's no science. There's been no observation even there. So I have to reject that as false.
So because you don't have evidence for something, you think it's okay to conclude that it's false. So have you heard of like the black swan fallacy?
Yeah, it's been a minute, but
sure. So up until a certain period of time, all the swans we'd ever seen were white. And based on your reasoning, it would be okay to conclude that there are no black swans. And then all of a sudden, we found a black swan. And so that demonstrates that there were black swans. So the fallacy was in concluding that there weren't something just because you hadn't seen evidence for it. However, while that is in fact a fallacy, you are in a position where you're willing to do it for the Loch Ness Monster. So why is it a problem for you that I do it for God? Jenna doesn't do that for God. Jenna's just still not convinced. She's not saying there is no God. She's just saying, hey, much like the Loch Ness Monster, there isn't good evidence for this.
All right, so I call myself an agnostic atheist, meaning I don't know, but I don't think so.
Well, would you agree that knowledge is a subset of belief?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if atheism is not believing God exists, but agnostic is withholding of judgment on either P or not P, that just sounds a little strange to me. Maybe
think about it for a little while.
Well, no, so Steve's not entirely wrong. The agnostic atheist definition, or that particular combination, is garbage. Because it's asserting that you don't have knowledge about something that's not a belief. It is not a real thing. But what is real is that if someone were anti-theist and an agnostic anti-theist like that, that would make more sense.
How can you agnostic anti-theist? Like, I'm strongly against something that I don't believe in, but I can't say I don't know, but I don't think so.
Agnostic is not strongly against. Agnostic is about knowledge.
No, anti-theist is.
So anti-theism, as I'm using it, is
strongly disbelieve.
Yeah. So anti-theism, as I'm using it, is disbelieves the proposition. Well, not just disbelieves the proposition. Believes proposition is false. Accepts not P. Anyway, we're way far afield here, Steve, because you think there's a God. I don't. Janet doesn't. I actually go a step further, and I think there are no gods. How convinced am I? I'm not certain. I'm not certain of anything. But I don't know why this can be confusing to you, because you're not only not convinced there's not that there is a Loch Ness monster, you're convinced there isn't when you've done no research and haven't investigated, haven't been able to go. Like, I bet you haven't even been to the loch.
I think the flying spaghetti monster might be a good example.
Yeah, no, except we know that was an invented fiction.
Yeah, that's true.
But anyway, I'm not going to keep going through this basic Atheism 101 definitions. We're going to move on, Steve.
Thanks for trying, Steve. Maybe call back after you think on it for a while.
Yeah, the whole, is it lack of belief, whatever. So the point that he was getting to, which is real, is if you're a theist, you accept a proposition, and the proposition is some God exists. And because now you have a belief, a positive belief, and knowledge is a subset of belief, you can discuss whether or not your belief rises to the level of knowledge. If you just lack a belief, well, then there's no positive proposition there to consider for agnosticism, which is why the agnostic label is incredibly problematic, which is one of the reasons why I stopped using it. And I talk about, well, for me, it wouldn't be as problematic because it's true. I'm an agnostic anti-theist, but I am convinced there are no gods, but I'm not going to claim to know there are no gods.
I see.
Yeah, I'm
so definitely. I don't know, but I don't know.
And that's separate from whether or not I'm certain, because certainty isn't a requirement for knowledge either. But
okay, all right.